Hello everybody, it's Fuze here, and today we'll be picking up on The Only Thing to Fear. And if you have not seen the part 1 of The Only Thing to Fear, then you should go watch it. It'll get you caught up on the story. We did chapter 1 last time, and I explained why I have these goggles instead of my normal. I meant glasses. These glasses instead of my normal goggles. I explained that last video, and I don't feel like explaining it again. So, without further ado, let's get on into chapter 2. Oh wow, I turned directly to it. So, we shall start, and whatever you're doing right now, maybe just grab a nice cup of tea, a nice beverage, whatever you like, just preferably maybe a Coca-Cola, some vodka, some tea, some coffee, whatever floats your boat, and get into a comfortable position. I'll let you do that now. Okay. Now that you're in a comfortable position, I hope, let's begin. They climbed into Uncle Red's ancient truck, a red Volkswagen with an engine like a foghorn. Key in ignition, the truck let out a roar, and they rumbled down the mud-caked road, lumbering past acres of corn and leafy beans that the Nazis would later seize to feed the troops at Fort Goring. Every farmer was required to pay a land tax to the Empire, which made Zara's blood simmer at every harvest. After months of her and her uncle's hard work, the Germans would take the very best crops and leave them with corn husks and bug-eaten cabbage. She hated cabbage. Uncle Red cracked open his window, and the faint scent of cow manure wafted into the cab. "Who gave you the announcement?" One of the town magistrates, a sentinel. The fresh memory of his visit made Zara's skin crawl. That leering smile of his, the one who can fly. "He's new, isn't he, Sentinel Aachen? I think. We better move the radio to be safe." Zara nodded. For years they had hidden a small transistor radio inside the hen house, tucked under the floorboards along with her great-great-grandfather's rifle and pistol. Every week or two, Uncle Red would use the radio to speak with the Alliance through the coded messages. It was the only reliable method of communication they had found to skirt the Nazis' watchful eyes. "We should have checked the radio before we left," said Zara, as the truck hit a bump. "The Alliance could have figured out what this announcement is about." "We will find out soon enough." A thought struck her. Do you think the Soviets have something to do with this? Maybe they broke the pact. Back in 1939, Hitler and Stalin had signed the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact, which had kept the two countries in a tense peace for decades. But in recent years, Comrade Pyotr Volkov had seemed keen on expanding into the borderlands that separated Germany from the Reds. The Alliance believed that a few of those border nations, like Latvia and Estonia, could be sympathetic to the communist cause. "Volkov wouldn't act so rashly," said Uncle Red as he turned onto the gravel leading into town. "His own anomaly soldiers are strong, but they can't compete against the German anomaly division just yet." Zara sighed, slightly deflated, and stared out her window at the rolling hills passing by. Her uncle had a penchant for poking holes in her theories, and as much as she hated to admit it, he was right about this one. During the war, the Nazis had led the race to create the first superpowered soldier. At the behest of Fuhrer Adolf, known as the Dresden Study, the German geneticist had plucked, as you know, give me one sec. Oh, that felt good. Just as you know, I'm not too good at English. I'm Russian, so that's my first language. Where was I? Known as the Dresden Study. The German geneticists had plucked test subjects from concentration camps, mostly Jews and gypsies. By 1941, they had unleashed a battalion of bulletproof anomalies onto the streets of London. In mere weeks, the single battalion had killed off a third of the parliament and flattened half of the British capital before their genes destabilized from the wartime experiments. Nearly all of the first anomalies fell into comas and died. The Nazi scientists still had their work cut out for them, but soldiers had completed their mission. Churchill surrendered a month later. Let's see how long this chapter is. All right. This is a long one. Okay. Oh man, okay. We're on page 10, and we have to go to page 24, so I'm giving you a very good read tonight. After England fell, the rest of the world had scrambled to their own laboratories. Japan had an early start. Its military had been experimenting on Chinese and Russian prisoners since the 1930s, and its first anomaly troops, dubbed the Ronin Elite, debuted in 1942. The Soviets followed suit a year later, but the Americans opted to focus on their top-secret Manhattan Project, hoping to fight the anomalies with an atomic bomb. Their gamble, however, went sour. Before the United States could test their secret weapon, the Nazis attacked the American East Coast while Japan struck from the west. Thousands of anomaly troops flooded the country, crushing the United States under the Axis's polished boot. Uncle Red rolled up his window, his jaw visibly tense. Remember what I told you at the house. Be careful at the square. Zara sighed. This again? I know, Uncle Red. A mile later, the truck entered the Greenfield town limits, and the small, sagging houses gave way to the red brick townhomes. Proudly standing over cobblestone streets, iron gas lamps lit the clean sidewalks, and flower boxes dangled from the windows, popping with pink tulips and cherry daffodils. Zara frowned at the picture-perfect sight. Only the wealthy could live here. Only the Nazis. The truck puttered down a side road and halted outside the offices of the old Virginian Post-Observer, long abandoned after the Nazis destroyed its presses. Next door to it, Zara saw the remnants of the synagogue that had been burned long before. It was strange to think about the Jews who had once worshipped there, who had made Greenfield their home, and almost all of them had been shot during the post-war cleansings, although a few had managed to survive by going into hiding or assuming new identities. Zara's hand gripped the door handle as she thought about her best friend, Molly Burns, whom she met back in primary school. Molly had been the only one who didn't care about Zara's Japanese side. In the hot Shenandoah summers, they would spend hours at the Burns Pond, and during the fall, they filled their stomachs with fat red plums. But Molly disappeared just after the girls... I got a notification. But Molly disappeared just after the girls turned 13. Her whole family had vanished along with her. Uncle Red was the one who broke the news to Zara, that years before Molly was born, the Burnses had once been the Birnbaums. Molly's great-great-grandparents had converted into Protestant. Oh, this is some big words in this book. Protestantism before the war. But the Nazis had divorced their Jewish heritage and shot them all dead, burning their bodies until the smoke cluttered the pale morning sky. Thinking about that day still brought a lump to Zara's throat. The Empire had killed so many people she had loved. Her best friend, her own mother. Far, far too many. Turning her head away from the synagogue, Zara hopped out of the truck and started for the square. But her uncle caught her by the elbow. Keep your chin down, he said. His head was cocked toward a half-dozen soldiers patrolling the street for the announcement. They each wore a green helmet and cradled a standard-issue Heckler & Koch rifle. As they drew closer, Uncle Red tilted his chin downward and motioned for Zara to do the same. But she stole a glance at the soldiers anyway. She couldn't help noticing that some of them were Japanese, proven by the little red sun flags on their armbands. Only full-blooded Japanese were given honorary Aryan statues in the German Empire, a nod to the long-standing alliance between Germany and Japan. Ooh, I'm gonna need some water after this. These soldiers must be stationed at Fort Goring on a military exchange program, a goodwill gesture between the two allies. Years ago, Zara's father had been one of these soldiers too. She didn't know much about him, aside from the fact that he had filed for an immediate transfer once the girl had been secretly seeing Zara's mother, told him she was pregnant. One of the soldiers caught Zara's eye, but she swiftly looked across the street. When she was little, she didn't know any better. She had wandered up to a Japanese captain and asked if he knew her father, Corporal Tanaka. The soldier had taken one look at Zara and said, "Why would I know anything about your father or his trash?" When he started laughing, she had run away, tears streaming down her cheeks. She realized then how her father must have been viewed for her. Trash, litter, garbage to be thrown away, just as he had thrown away her mom. "You all right?" "You're pale." Uncle Red looped an arm around her shoulder. Zara shrugged and sank against him, his hug reminding her that not everyone had abandoned her. As much as Uncle Red frustrated her, as much as she wanted to box his ears sometimes, he was the only father she had known and the only one she needed. Rearrange. As they neared the town center, they zigzagged through the crowd of farmers in their sweat-soaked shirts and the iron miners in their dusty overalls who'd been let out early for the announcement. Zara followed her uncle into a wide bricked courtyard, commonly known as the square. The Greenfield courthouse lay ahead of them, a centuries-old building that had once been the pride of the town, with its white pillars and handsome bell tower, but now it was used for official Nazi business, complete with a portrait of Führer Dieter hanging above its doors. Everyone was expected to salute the painting whenever they walked under it. Zara had always done so obediently, but that didn't stop her belly from twisting every time. She hated looking into Dieter's plump face and his ridiculous rectangle of a mustache, the same mustache that his great-grandfather had favored. "Where's the... Oh, sorry, I'm a little sick." Sorry, I caught a little bit of a cold. I have people talking downstairs. Must be my wife talking to my children. And yes, I am wearing shorts. I wear my casual clothes sometimes, you know. If the camera is a little sideways, I'm sorry about that. "Where's the painting of Reich Marshal Faust?" Uncle Red said. He nodded to the blank space next to the Führer's portrait where a likeness of Reich Marshal Faust, the cousin of the Führer and the head commander of the terrorists, usually hung. "Maybe they're putting up a new one." "Maybe," Uncle Red said, although his eyes narrowed and he didn't look convinced. Zara pushed deeper into the crowd, murmuring a quick "pardon me" to the German housewife she bumped into. As usual, the Hausfrauen were dressed in the latest fashions from Berlin: leather riding boots, wide-legged trousers, and delicate blouses patterned with tiny white silver swastikas. The women had brought their broods along for the show, stair-step children with cornhusk hair. Since the war, the Nazis had encouraged women to bear large families to spread the area line, and now it was a common sight to see a German mother with 5, 6, or 7 children in tow. They reminded Zara of the neighbors' broodmares, popping out child after child until their bodies could take no more. "Redmond, over here." Zara's head swiveled to find Miss Tally, a dear family friend, and another member of the alliance, waving a wrinkled hand in their direction. The old woman stood at the far corner of the square, with her hair tucked into a bun and red shawl draped around her shoulders. She leaned against a lamppost to relieve her aching right hip. Uncle Red threaded towards her. "Hello, my sweet girl." Miss Tally greeted Zara with a warm hug and a peck on the cheek, a ritual left over from when Zara was little. You wouldn't happen to know what this is all about, would you? My nose always itches, doesn't it? Sorry. I'm sorry about that. We'll continue. Where was I? Would you? I thought it could be the Soviets, but he shot that idea down, said Zara, gesturing at her uncle. Uncle Red tensed. Let's keep our voices down. Miss Tally only smiled. It's all right. I'm sure no one heard us with all this chatter around us. Doesn't hurt to be careful, Uncle Red, said Uncle Red, staring straight at Zara. Zara folded her arms, but she nodded. Her uncle's paranoia often chewed on her last nerve, but she couldn't exactly beruge him for it. After all, he had weathered his share of Nazi interrogations because his father, Zara's grandfather, had been imprisoned for possessing an alliance pamphlet. The Nazis had sent Louis St. James straight to a labor camp, where he succumbed to pneumonia 6 months later. Not long after his death, the Nazis started sniffing around the St. James farm more and more, although that hadn't stopped Zara's mother and Uncle Red from joining the alliance. The crowd hushed as 3 armored SUVs rolled down the street from Fort Goring. Rising on her tiptoes, Zara watched the vehicles stop. A dozen soldiers spilled out from their doors, including Sentinel Akin. Seeing him made Zara grimace, wishing she could scrub her skin clean. The soldiers found around a large stage that had been erected on the eastern side of the square, rising 6 feet above the ground. Behind the stage, a large white screen the size of a movie theater display had been assembled for the broadcast. A Nazi officer had stepped out the last SUV, and the soldiers snapped to attention. Zara's mouth screwed tight at the sight of him. It was Colonel Eckhart, the commanding officer of Fort Goring, marching onto stage with his silver hair slicked back and his boots gleaming like a mirror. A bleached white smile occupied his face, the same smile he wore whenever he ordered a public beating or execution. At the sight of that grin, Zara fought off a scowl. Colonel Eckhart may have possessed the good looks of a Munich cinema star, but his heart was as black as tar underneath. He had no problem ordering a soldier to kill communists, Jews, or homosexuals. Not that there were many of them left nowadays. The Nazis had estimated an untold number of undesirables during the post-war cleansings, and any survivors had learned to live in hiding long ago. But as much as Colonel enjoyed killing a Soviet sympathizer or closeted homosexual, nothing made him happier than catching an alliance rebel, his personal favorite. Citizens of Greenfield. Colonel Eckhart held up a megaphone, and his tenor voice blared like a ringmaster welcoming a fresh group of onlookers. His right arm snapped up. Heil Hitler, Sieg Heil. The crowd returned with the salute. Sieg Heil, they chanted, a popular rallying cry. Hail victory. I am pleased today to bring you a message from our beloved leader, Führer Dieter Hitler. Without further ado, the colonel motioned towards the white screen and nodded at one of his soldiers, whose hands fluttered over a box of controls. A few seconds ticked by before the broadcast began. What was that last word? A Nazi flag waved against a bright blue sky, accompanied by a cherry recording of the Nazi national anthem. When the music ended on a high F note, the flag was replaced with a live feed of the Führer, who sat behind a heavy oak desk in his Berlin palace. Behind him, the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Berlin skyline, filled with 100-floor condominiums and shiny skyscrapers that boasted of the city's wealth. The Führer was dressed in full military regula, even though he had never stepped foot on the battlefield. He wore a trim olive-green uniform with broad epaulets on each shoulder, and a blinding array of medals hung over his breast pocket. To the right of him, Dieter's beautiful wife Anke and their 9-year-old son Johann smiled at the camera. Their pale hair combed to perfection. They are the picture of the idyllic Aryan family, but that picture was incomplete. At their Parisian summer home 4 years later, Dieter and Anka's twin girls had been killed in a bombing attack orchestrated by the French rebels. Dieter and Johann had escaped unharmed, but Anka had been in a coma for a month, and she was now rumored to be barren. Zara's gaze drifted to the back of the screen, her eyes drawn to the 4 soldiers lined up behind the Fuhrer. The core of 4. A shiver wormed its way down her spine. All 4 of them were dual anomalies, the rarest of anomalies who possessed not 1 but 2 powers, caused by a genetic glitch that the Nazi scientists couldn't recreate in their laboratories. Only a few dozen were known worldwide, and they were all extensively trained in the art of killing. Zara had no doubt that they could destroy her in 100 different ways, each one more gruesome than the next. The camera panned briefly over the Core's faces. Zara could never remember the names, but she certainly remembered their abilities. At the very left stood the medic, who could absorb his patient's pain and mend flesh wounds with the brush of his hand. To his right, there was Mind Controller, who could plant ideas in people's thoughts and knock people unconscious with a flick of his wrist. Then there was the Protector, the youngest of the 4, who wore her platinum hair in 2 plaits, who could conjure fireballs from her fingertips and hurl icicles from her palms. Last, there was the Monster, standing over 7 feet tall, who could withstand bullets in his impenetrable skin and strangle an 18-hand stallion with his super strength. Apparently he had wrestled grizzly bears for training. Zara shivered again, with the core of 4 at his side. It was no wonder the Fuhrer had survived multiple assassination attempts over the past 15 years. Only a year ago, an unnamed group rumored to be financed by the Soviets had tried to bomb Dieter's limousine, but the Monster had pushed the vehicle to safety while the Protector burnt the terrorist to a char. As long as the core was nearby, Dieter was practically invincible. The crowd fell in an empty silence as the Fuhrer sat forward in his leather chair. No one dared make a sound. Greetings, my citizens, Dieter said in German. His voice boomed as strong as his father, Anselm's, who had ruled the Nazi Empire for a decade before succumbing to a cancer that his doctors couldn't treat. It is not often that I address my subjects in the territories, but today is a fortunate one, for I bring good tidings to you. The camera panned out as Dieter's wife and the core of 4 broke into a polite applause. Even Johann clapped his chubby hands together, elicting a proud smile from his mother. So young and brainwashed, Zara thought. If Molly were here, they would glance at each other and resist the urge to roll their eyes. How many more pages? Okay. After 3 years of service, Reichsmil Faust, the commander of the Eastern American territories, is entering retirement. We wish him well. Dieter's words were flat and rough as sandpaper, as if he didn't wish Faust well at all. Oh, hiccups. Well at all. Zara's eye flickered towards her uncle. This move made little sense. Reichsmarschall Faust was only in his early 50s, far too early to retire. Besides, Faust had been eager to command the territories ever since he and Dieter had graduated from military school together. Why would he give up his plum assignment after only a few years? And why was this good news? Dieter continued. Now, as for who will oversee the territories in Reichsmarschall Faust's absence, I have appointed the German Emmerich Bodler to the job. He appeared much sunnier as he motioned off the camera. A second later, a barrel-chested man walked onto the screen. His beard neatly trimmed and his chin tipped high in that arrogant Nazi way. General Balder, soon to be Reichsmarschall Balder, has spent 12 years in the North African colonies, overseeing our troops there. Prior to that, he has also served in the French territorial state in the British Isles. General Balder stepped forward, a nicotine-stained smile glowing from beneath his mustache. He saluted the Fuhrer with a heady Heil Hitler. Dieter nodded. Excuse me. I'm stupid cold. Where was I? Dieter nodded and looked back at the camera. Reich Marshal Balder will arrive in the territories tomorrow. To my subjects there, I ask that you give him a warm welcome. Guten Tag. The feed returned to a waving Nazi flag, and Zara blinked at the movie screen. That was it. The entire announcement had lasted mere minutes. The Fuhrer could have easily presented this news in the papers, but he had called a worldwide broadcast instead. Zara wondered if there was something happening behind the scenes. Why hadn't Faust attended the announcement? Had he and the Fuhrer had a falling out? Maybe the Alliance knew more about this. She'd have to nudge her uncle to ask them for details. As the screen fell dark, Colonel Eckhart swept back onto the stage and clapped his hands furiously, forcing everyone else to follow suit. The miners merely tapped their hands together, but the Hausfrauen gave a rousing bout of applause, as if Adolf Hitler himself had risen from his crypt. Long live the Fuhrer, long live General Balder, Colonel Eckhart said into his microphone. The masses echoed back the chant. Zara heard one voice shouting something else entirely. Long live the murderer, long live the slaughterer of children. And Zara went still. Did that person want a death sentence? Her gaze snaked through the square until she found the man saying such treasonous things, and she was cringed when she found him. It was old Mr. Carey, one of her neighbors. He was sympathetic to the Alliance, although he had never joined. However, his two sons had, but they perished in Mission Metzger 9 years ago. An Alliance attack that had sought to take over Fort Metzger in central Maryland and steal its long-range missiles. But the mission had ended in misery. Tens of thousands of rebels were killed, including Mr. Talley's husband and Zara's mother. Their lives were lost thanks to a cunning Nazi major who had tortured an Alliance rebel until she revealed the secret mission plans. After the battle was over, the major had promoted and given command of his own fort. Now he stood on the stage in front of Zara, Major Eckhart, Colonel Eckhart to be exact. Long live Dieter Hitler and oppressor, Mr. Carey slurred. And is this the last 2 pages? Oh. Okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 5 pages left. Okay, almost done. He had perched himself by the courthouse entrance, waving his arms over his head. The people standing near him hurried down the steps, hoping to distance themselves. That poor man, Mrs. Talley whispered. I delivered both of his sons. He's been drinking again, Zara murmured. He has no idea what he's saying. There's nothing we can do for him now, Uncle Red said grimly. Zara ached to do something anyway. Mr. Carey was one of the few townspeople who had never frowned at the color of her skin. He brought her soup when she was sick and read her stories after her mother died, even though he was grieving for his own children, too. If she was standing near the courthouse, she could try to get him to quiet down before the Nazis saw him. But Colonel Eckhart had already spotted him. Bring that man to me, he shouted to Sentinel Akin. Yes, sir, the sentinel said with a grin of his. It didn't take long for him to fly to the steps and hoist Mr. Carey back to the stage, where he shoved the old man onto his knees. Colonel Eckhart paced the stage, circling Mr. Carey. It appears you have a strong opinion of our Fuhrer. There was a lightness in his tone that made Zara cringe, like he was playing with his prey before he devoured it. Our Fuhrer is an oppressor, I take it. Perhaps you forgot about his charitable work in the territories. Every month he provides food for the poor and orphans, in case you've forgotten. The colonel's nose scrunched as he glanced at Mr. Carey's vomit-stained shirt. Or perhaps you're angry the dieter doesn't offer free liquor. The Nazi smirked, but Mr. Carey's shoulders shook with a sob. He murdered my children. My sons. Sorry if the camera's all wonky. I could Nah, I'm not gonna lay down like that. That looks a little bit strange. I'll just kind of scoot up to the camera. Oh, the Führer himself did such a thing. All the way from Berlin. Laughter erupted from the German onlookers. Near the stage, a group of young Nazi cadets with their hair spiked gels sniggered like jackals and shouted names at Mr. Carey. Only one of them didn't participate in the heckling. A tall boy with a flop of messy blonde curls. A couple years older than Zara. He stood at the periphery of the group, his face blank. Zara squinted at him, then frowned. It was Bastien Eckhart, the colonel's son. Rumor had it that he was the first class snob, that his father's high status had gone to his head. But apparently Bastien hadn't inherited his father's glee at shaming peasants, or Kleinbauern, as they were disdainfully called. Scoff all you want, but America will rise again, Mr. Carey said. You Nazis think you've trodden us down, but we'll come for you one day. The Alliance will come for you. He staggered to his feet and tried to lunge at the colonel, but the soldiers fell on him. The first strike hit Mr. Carey's arm, was smacking the bone with a skin-splitting crack. The second hit his head. Blood shot out of his nose, maybe his mouth. Zara wasn't sure. She had buried her face against her uncle's shoulder, too sickened to watch. Mr. Carey was a 70-year-old man, but the Nazis were beating him like a piece of leather. Mr. Talley curled a thin arm around Zara. It'll be over soon. Not soon enough. Mr. Carey lay in a bloody heap on the stage, whimpering. Colonel Eckhart finally looked satisfied. Take him to the camp, he said to his guards. They grabbed the old man by the arms and tossed him into the back of a truck. Zara's fist knotted at her sides. She didn't want to stand here doing nothing. Her mother would have done something, wouldn't she? But there were Nazis all around her, in the square, on the streets. Let this be a lesson to you, Kleinbauern, Colonel Eckhart said to the throng. I will not tolerate, and Rashmalbalder will not tolerate any defamation of our Führer. After everything he has done for us, is this the way we thank him? We paused. He paused. But no one said a word. With a curt nod he said, Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. Zara gave a limp salute before the crowd broke apart, and they headed back to the truck. Miss Talley squeezed her hand, something that always made Zara's heart lighten. But she only felt heavy today. Around them, the Hausfrauen babbled about how handsome Johann was becoming, while the cadets threw bottles at the SUV that was hauling Mr. Carey away. Disgust rolled through Zara. She wanted to tear those bottles from them, but she forced her hands to remain at her sides. Stay calm, her uncle would tell her. You can't cause a scene. But Zara was so sick of these beatings and those heckling cadets, she wanted to fight back. She was ready for it, like her mom had once been. But she couldn't do a thing. Not when the Nazis had bullets and guns. Not when they outnumbered her 100 to 1. If she tried to help Mr. Carey, they would throw her into a camp. And maybe they'd beat her uncle and make her watch him scream. She would expect nothing less from them. Zara broke into a run. Uncle Red and Mrs. Talley called out for her, but she didn't stop until she reached the vehicle. Her breaths heavy. She had been forced to watch over a dozen public beatings, but this one had been different. Mr. Carey wasn't a nameless face. He was a good man, a good neighbor. But now the Nazis had taken him, just as they had taken Molly, just as they had taken her mother. Uncle Red reached the truck behind her and pushed her in before he got into the driver's seat. Are you having an episode? Zara, look at me. I'm fine, she irritated that he was treating her like a child again. I just had to get out of there. He leaned back in his seat, relieved. You scared me. Do you think Mr. Carey is... He's tough. The chances are good that he'll live, but he won't survive long in that camp. Uncle Red said nothing. He didn't have to. The Front Royal labor camp was a nightmare. Her grandfather had been a much younger man than Carey when he was sent there, and he hadn't survived past 6 months. I wish. Zara started and stopped. She knew there was nothing she could have done, and yet I only wish. I wish I could have helped him. I wish I could have helped him too, but there's nothing we could have done. He started up the engine. If Mom were alive, she might have done something, Zara said quietly. Frustration flashed over Uncle Red's features. Even Annie wouldn't have been that reckless. Zara hugged her knees to her chest. Maybe her uncle was right. Maybe her mother would have done nothing at the square. But then again, Zara could easily see her mom staying up late in the kitchen, just diagramming ways to break Mr. Carey out of the labor camp. Back then, her uncle would have joined in too, but he had once been the best shot in the Shenandoah Valley. But that was before Mission Metzger. Now his actions were always measured, always careful. Zara's mom wouldn't have recognized this man. A marble-thick silence settled in the car as Uncle Red put the truck in gear. Outside, dozens of farmers and miners filled the sidewalks to get back to work, but Zara didn't notice them. She only saw Mr. Carey getting beaten and thrown into the truck. Stop thinking about it, Uncle Red said. It'll only upset you more. Couldn't we contact the Alliance? There's nothing they could do either. His hands tightened over the steering wheel. I'm sorry you had to watch that beating, but this is the world we live in. The Nazis make the rules and we have to follow them. It's as simple as that. Zara hugged herself tighter. When did he become this callous? Uncle Red never would have said these things before Mission Metzger. Being cautious was the one thing, but accepting Nazi rules was something else entirely. Do you understand what I'm saying? He said. She said nothing. Answer me, Zara. His eyes bored into her, and she knew she had to reply. I understand, she said, but she didn't understand at all. And that, my comrades, that was chapter 2. And that was a long chapter, but I have to, what time is it? I have to head to bed now. I have to get low because the camera keeps moving, but I have to get to bed now, my comrades, and it was good meeting you. I hope to see you again in the next video. So I'll see you later, my comrades.